I'm a firm believer in right is right and wrong is wrong. If I do something wrong, I have no problem putting my hand in there and saying, hey, I made a mistake. I did something wrong. Let's do what we got to do and get past it. I also don't do things, I won't ask somebody to do something I'm not willing to do. If I'm willing to put my hand up and say, hey, I made a mistake, I was wrong, I would expect my guys to do the same thing. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, I did this, X, Y, and Z, all right, we can get through it. I guess that's how I deal with it. If they didn't do anything wrong, then they got nothing to worry about.
Hey, welcome to Battles and Breakthroughs. I'm your host, Dylan Bates, and we're here today with Mike Dotto from Tennessee. Looking forward to hearing all about him. We want to thank our sponsor, Project Icon, and thank you for all that you do for us and our wonderful editing team. You guys are amazing. So, Mike, I wanted to introduce you. Tell me what brought you here today. Tell me about yourself.
So, I'm originally from the South Florida area. Started my law enforcement career down there after I was in the Marine Corps. Was out in California. Then got married, had two beautiful kids, moved up here to Tennessee, and then ended up in the Middle Tennessee area.
And what are you doing in Tennessee?
So I work for a local sheriff's department. I'm a lieutenant over the special operations team, the administration part of it, and internal affairs.
Wow, it sounds like heavy loads you carry. And how long have you been working in Tennessee?
I've been here 16 years. We're about a 50-man department, so we wear a lot of different hats within our department.
Yeah. So you have worn many hats. You were a Marine, a deputy, a detective, financial crimes investigator. So looking back, what moment first tested your belief in service before self, and how did it shape you and who you are today?
When you're in the Marine Corps, they teach you that you're expected to do a job, you're expected to do it right, you're expected to do it great. You almost get no recognition. As we go on to different aspects of our life in the civilian world, it's a little bit different. You do get recognition, you do get accolades along those lines. So coming from the Marine Corps into the civilian world, I never expected to get any kind of rewards or accolades or anything like that for doing what I'm expected to do.
Wow, that's insane. What accolades have you received in your time of service?
So when I was in law enforcement down in South Florida, I've got multiple awards for Officer of the Year twice, Officer of the Quarter 6 times. In Tennessee, I have 3 life-saving awards, have Officer of the Year 3 times, Officer of the Quarter multiple times. So those are the kind of awards that I've accomplished.
Wow. So when you have these awards and you're going through receiving them, I've often heard that officers that receive the awards, they're always like, I'm just doing my job. Is that how you feel, or is there a different feeling you have associated with them?
Absolutely. Every award I've accomplished or achieved is just because I've done my job. Sometimes I was at the right place at the right time, saw the right things. And that's basically every life-saving award I had. I was just at the right place at the right time and had the right means and ability to help somebody.
Is there a story specifically that has really impacted you that you want to talk about?
We just had a incident where I was coming home, actually coming home kind of late. Saw this vehicle kind of go off to the side of the road, and I was like, that looks kind of weird. Go right up onto a porch of a house. The car started filling with smoke and was on fire, and ended up breaking the window out and cutting the guy's seatbelt and pulling him off. He did succumb to the injuries. He had a medical event. That was pretty eye-opening because it could happen to anybody, anywhere, at any time. Just a freak accident.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like you were there at, like you said, right place, right time. And you said he succumbed to his injuries, so he didn't make it through.
He didn't die as a result of the crash. He died as a result of why he crashed. I believe he had a massive heart attack. And that's what caused him to glance off of the vehicle in front of him and into the house. Thankfully, the house was abandoned.
Wow. So you being at the right place at the right time, I think there's a lot of people who have done so many things that they don't get the recognition. And I think there's a lot of agencies and a lot of officers who often don't get the recognition. So it's great to hear that there are departments who still recognize their officers and leadership who still shows that appreciation for their own officers and staff. So that's really nice to hear that there's some agencies that still have the backs of their office.
Oh, our sheriff and our chief deputy are all about recognition of people who do good. They're there if somebody needs help. I definitely give them props with the way they treat our road deputies, because a lot of administrators, they've been out of the road so long they forget what it's like to be on the road, but not our
Yeah,
bosses.
yeah, absolutely. And what about you as a leader? Have you ever given anyone recognition?
But yeah, I've for a long time with the old administrators, I was constantly writing letters of recognition to who need it, especially our jailers. They get almost no recognition. They're constantly getting spit on, have feces thrown at them, and it's a thankless job. But I've written multiple letters of recommendation.
Is there any officers ever really just touched your heart? Something that you've seen or observed that you've someone you've worked with or a subordinate?
You know, honestly, there's so many to set one out wouldn't be fair to the others. But the guys we work with now, they're really motivated. They're young. They work really hard. So to pick one out, it just wouldn't be fair.
I love that. I think that's really great that you have a lot of officers that there's so many you can't even pick. That's incredible,
Right.
actually, especially in this day and age. So,
Hmm.
well, I know I kind of put you on the spot with that. I want to go back to you and who you, um, looking at your background, I read that you have a master's in accountancy. So that's just wild to me. It's a path that most people wouldn't connect to homicide or child sex crimes. So I'm really curious, how has your background in finance and forensic accounting changed the way that you see the truth and deception and human behavior?
The degree that I got was actually a what if something happens to me type degree in law enforcement. But what it's taught me to do is it's taught me to look beyond what I'm actually seeing, do the research, look into everything, make sure you have all your facts lined up and organize your facts. That way you don't miss something. Make sure you exhaust all your leads, make sure you exhaust everything, and you have everything that you need to look at to present to do what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a time that that's ever really come in handy during one of your investigations?
Actually, there was. It was unfortunately, it was a child case. The children had gotten an STD that could only be transmitted from the infected member, meaning there would have to be some type of penetration. And there were several individuals we looked at, and then we started focusing on clinics around our area. And we sent out subpoenas to these clinics, and we found who the offender was because they actually went to a clinic in a adjacent county. It's one of the more disturbing cases I've had to work because it's a really sad case. But that's one that you want to make sure that all your facts are there, that all your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted, your semicolons are in the right place, your periods are there, because these kids don't have the ability to get justice for themselves. So we are their voice. So that's one of the cases that I can remember. There was another particular case that I started when I first went into financial crimes, where a bookkeeper had embezzled over 5 years almost $6 million from a company, and it was basically because their accounting practices were absolutely horrible. But having to put everything together and all the records we had to go through was very tedious. But it's that organizational skill that came in handy from getting my master's degree and going to college that allowed me to stay focused and stay on track and basically find out how she was doing what she was doing.
Yeah, it sounds like you have an eye for detail with that and, really seeing things through. It's interesting that you mentioned that too, because, I've worked child sex cases in my career numerous times and have had cases like that where we've gone through STD records and things from hospitals, and man, they don't want to give those records out.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost impossible to track people down that way. Not impossible, but almost. It really takes an eye for detail, and I'm sure that forensic accounting, going through all of those financial records, those were the cases that nobody wanted because there's just so much. You have to really go
Right.
through one by one, right? And there's so much paperwork, but those are also the cases that, in my opinion, were also the ones that I like to work because there's no violence in the victim, right? Usually it's
Right.
paperwork and having to track someone down and just really having an eye for detail. But to me, those were fun cases because you'd have your paperwork stacked like this from all the different cases, right? But you were able to actually go through it. And if you looked hard enough, you'd be able to find it because there's always a paper trail with money. You just follow the money, right?
You follow the money, you see where watch it go right to where it needs to go every
Exactly.
time.
Well, as someone who has investigated violent crimes and child sex abuse cases, what's one of that fundamentally changed how you view humanity or maybe even yourself?
It really opens up your eye to how cruel a person can be. It really sheds a light on what the human is truly capable of. At a time in my career, it made me very cynical, very distant. I wouldn't open up to anybody. I just kept to myself. And it's just, you see the worst in people. And it's actually discussing what another human being can do to a human being, especially when it comes to the domestic aspect of it. The rage that you see in these crimes, it really makes you distance yourself from people sometimes.
Yeah. When you were distancing yourself from people, did you know that you were doing that, or did it take someone else to bring you out of that or call you on it?
I was very lucky early on in my career. I had two mentors, both of them were Marines, who helped me understand that you're going to have lows in this career. And when you start having repeated horrible things over and over and over and over again, that you need to take a step back and talk to somebody. And that's what I did. I had really four cases right in a row that were very shocking to the conscience, I should say. Ended up going to talk to, we have a department chaplain, and ended up talking to him for a little bit. And I've got another friend here who I rely on real heavily when I have one of my officers who are in need of something, and talk to him and help me recognize what I was doing. So I was fortunate enough to be able to recognize what I needed, and I got it myself.
So how did you pull yourself out of it when you recognized that?
Just talking, just expressing, just talking to somebody about it, talking to somebody who's been through that. Not necessarily the clergyman, but my other friend. We've been in law enforcement pretty much the same amount of time, and talking to other people who were there and seeing how they were feeling about it. It gets it out there. You know, it's okay that you're doing this. There's a problem. You've seen trauma. You've seen rage. You've seen what human beings shouldn't see. It's okay to vocalize it and let people know, hey, this hurt me. This got me.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a really good point with that. And, a lot of people will say that they just like to bottle it up and talking doesn't do anything. It just makes it worse. Especially as first responders, we're taught that, if we compartmentalize, we can just make it through and we can continue on and just we just hold on to it and we just forget about it and shove it down, shove it down, shove it down. But then people blow up, you know, they start lashing out, or people start seeing different sides of their own life and their own personality that isn't even theirs. It's taking on different personas that are the negative types that we deal with a lot, and they don't even realize it. So I think you bring up a good point, and something that we talk about a lot in our peer group, and what we really promote through Badges and Breakthroughs is we want people to talk and to get things off their chest. And it's okay to have the feelings that you feel, but talking really does help. Going to therapy helps, but as long as you don't have to go to therapy to feel better, but being able to have one trusted person in your life. And if you can count the trusted people on one hand that you have in your life, you're lucky, right? So
Right.
it's great that you were able to have someone to pull you out of that, and that you were able to confide in not only the chaplain of your department, but your friends. And that's huge. And I think it takes a lot of acknowledgement and really a lot of awareness and insight into yourself to be able to say, hey, I need to talk to somebody. So I I got to say, I'm proud of you, and I'm glad that you were able to share that with us today. And I really appreciate that for your vulnerability in that. I do want to ask, I know that you've been on both sides of accountability as an investigator and an ethics driven leader. How do you navigate the emotional toll of holding your own brothers and sisters in blue accountable?
I'm a firm believer in right is right and wrong is wrong.
Hmm.
If I do something wrong, I have no problem putting my hand in there and saying, hey, I made a mistake. I did something wrong. Let's do what we got to do and get past it. And I also don't do things. I won't ask somebody to do something I'm not willing to do. If I'm willing to put my hand up and say, hey, I made a mistake, I was wrong, I would expect my guys to do the same thing. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, Lieutenant, I did this, X, Y, and Z, all right, we can get through it. So I guess that's how I deal with it. If they didn't do anything wrong, then they got nothing to worry about.
The Marine Corps instills a mindset of mission first. So when you transitioned into civilian policing, did that discipline help or hinder you in connecting on an emotional level with the victims or colleagues?
I think it kind of hindered me a little bit. You know, the Marine Corps teaches instant obedience to orders. When you transition over to the civilian world, it's not like that. They're going to get it done when they want to get it done. They'll eventually get it done. For me, that was really hard with my colleagues. It's like, we got to get this done. We got all shift to take care of it. Well, let's just get it done now. And I still do that now. If my boss comes to me and says, hey, I need this taken care of, I stop what I'm doing. I do it right then and there. When it comes to victims, it probably hindered me a little bit too, being that Marine Corps firm, fair, tone. Sometimes you've got to learn to shake that. I've got a young Marine now. She's in basic training, and I see that in her. She's very by the book, she's good, motivated, wants to get everything done, but she's very, very rigid and very, very stiff. And sometimes people don't understand your background and where you're coming from, so they don't know why you're like that. And it does become a hindrance in some instances.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I know that, I'm very much like that as well. I'm very, well, I was, very, I want to get this done. I want to get this over with. Like, let's move on so I can get on to the next thing. It was just go, 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 go. So sometimes that can come from anxiety, but it sounds like it came from a lot of discipline from the Marine Corps, and that doesn't always transition into the civilian world. And I think that something that is so interesting to me as well in what you're saying is civilian policing, right? Like, those of us in law enforcement, we consider it paramilitaries. Those of us who are in law enforcement have not been in the military, I should say. Uh, It's paramilitary, but it's not the same circumstances. We still get to go home, to our loved ones and things like that. Um, I think there's often a disconnect between law enforcement and just civilians, not just
Right.
veterans who are law enforcement as well. So I think it's really interesting that you've been on both sides of that and that you've kind of had to transition, and I'm sure, what, you got another 10 years, 25 retirement?
Yeah, give or take, give or take.
Another 10 years, you'll be retiring and having to transition fully into that civilian lifestyle. And I wonder, I hope that, we stay connected. I want to see how that transition is. Recently, someone brought up to me that the way that the military transitions office or transitions you guys from active to back to civilian life, and there's that time period, right? Where they have that program where they transition you guys. Am I speaking out of context, or is that's like a real thing, right?
I could tell you it was 30 years ago. When I left Camp Pendleton, I signed a bunch of paperwork and they said, see you later. I had no classes, no counseling, nothing. I was just thrown to the wolves.
Holy cow.
Drove
What?
from Camp Pendleton, California, all the way back home in the Fort Lauderdale area.
Wow. What was that like? Like, that was that like a shock to you, or did you adjust well?
When I got into the job, when I got into the career aspect of it, it was a shock. And that was about a 2 or 3 month period before I got a full-time job. I had a friend of mine, we did odd jobs and construction stuff like that. But when I went to an organized career field, it was kind of a shock because, like, again, that rigidness came out and that discipline and instant obedient order came out, and it was hard. It was really hard. People didn't know how to take me because I was just so serious all the time. It was black or white. There was no color in there. and that was what's really hard to adjust to.
Did you adjust just time?
Time, and I had two great mentors that went through very similar to what I went through, and they definitely looked out for me. I could say that.
Yeah. Yeah, Pendleton, that's in California, right?
Yes,
Okay,
just
yeah. That's where I
between
grew.
Los Angeles and San Diego.
Yeah, yeah. I grew up in LA, so I'm familiar with that.
Okay.
Just wanted to make sure it was the right the right one that I'm thinking about. Me and geography don't get along all the time, so at least you're still near the beach. You grew up in Florida, and you get the beach there, and you get the beach in the core, so that's nice.
The water's cold out there, though.
Yes, yes, it's cold.
Water's cold.
My husband complains about that too because he's Hawaiian, and
Yeah,
the water out there is super warm. So I took him to the beach for the first time, and he had a ultra shock there. He thought it was like ice water. You would have thought you dumped ice cubes all in his bathtub or something. Man, I've never seen that man jump
yeah.
so high in my life.
I'm not a fan of cold water. We got a pool here, and it's got to be like bath temperature. My wife makes fun of me.
Yeah. Yep. Oh man. Well, speaking of humor, I know that cops often joke about, gallows humor, also known as like dark humor, and using that as a coping mechanism, right? So, looking back, do you think that humor protected you or numbed you?
It definitely protected me. It definitely protected me. I'm a
Both.
firm believer that laughter will cure a lot of things, and it definitely protected me if I was in the right crowd. And you've got to be in the right crowd for that to work. Because if you're not, then you're only creating problems. So, like I said, it's got to be in the right crowd.
Can you give me an example of when you were in the wrong crowd and that happened?
I was in the office, and we had the running joke that had been going on in the office for about 5 years, and one of the girls was new, and I cracked the joke, and she went to my boss, and yeah, it was, look, boss, it was just a joke. It's been a running joke for 5 years. Well, we can't do the joke no more. I got you. So, it's just, also, if you're in a public eye, you're at a very serious scene. They don't want to see cops laughing. They don't want to see cops joking around. They don't want to see that because they don't understand. There's a lot of things that people don't understand about law enforcement, about first responders in general. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now. They don't get it. Um, it's a job. We have a job to do. We have to protect ourselves. But they don't want to see that at a crime scene.
Yeah. Um, you're saying that, we're seeing a lot of that now, and you talk about they don't get it. Are you talking about civilian? Are you talking about politics, the media? What are you referring to?
All three of them. You've got the media that's putting out half truths. You've got the civilians that are being misled by politicians who are supposed to be their leaders, and are getting themselves hurt or getting themselves in trouble. They're interfering in things they don't need to interfere with. So it's all three of them. And I do work closely with the media as a public relations officer in my department, and I tell them all the time. I said, the second you put something out that's half true, we're done. So I've got three reporters I work with really closely, and they're great. They're really good, but that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah. I really love that you're bringing light to that, and that you do have reporters that you work closely with. I've always been afraid to talk to the media. That's been like a fear of mine forever. The twisting of stories and things like that. And those half truths are terrifying, and they're career ending often. So it's great that you found people that you're able to trust in that, and that are able to get the truth out without spinning the narrative, right?
Right.
In times like today, we talked about, using humor to protect yourself. And I think that, you brought up that we're seeing a lot of that, and that people don't want to see it on the TV when you're at a serious scene, with a death, or um, really any type of serious scene, like you were talking about violence or anything like that. But I think that you bring light to talking about, humor protecting you. And a lot of the time that humor is what's protecting those officers from completely breaking down on those scenes sometimes,
Mhm.
and yes, maybe it's not the most appropriate time to the public eye, but sometimes that's all that keeps someone standing straight up and able to do the job right then. And maybe that's not an appropriate time, but at the end of the day, if they're able to get the job done, right, like if we're trying to process things, that might be the only way they were able to process it instead of breaking down, because we don't know. Sometimes officers have had the same thing happen to them, or that's the fifth, death they've handled that week. It just, you don't know what someone's breaking point is. So I think that it's really great that you brought attention to that. So thank you for doing that. If you have
But
anything else.
even then, if the scene is secure and everybody's there, it's okay to break down. It's okay to go in your car and break down if emotionally. I'm not talking physically, but I'm saying emotionally. If you need to do that, it's okay. Everybody's going to understand. I've walked up on guys that are having a breakdown, and it's like, it's okay. You'll be all right. It lets everybody else know you're human. We have breaking points.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I just had a leader recently tell me that if I needed to go out and yell into the parking lot, or, scream to get something off my chest, into the woods, that I'm, I'm, I can do that, as long as, he didn't lose me off that scene, as long as I was able to keep myself pulled together to be able to keep working my cases or whatever. And I thought that that type of leadership was just really incredible, because I'd never been told that before. I also never had brought out that the job was taking such a toll on me, and I think that it took a lot for me to do that in the first place. But that type of leadership that you're mentioning, that's not seen amongst leaders all the time. It's not often that leaders will tell their subordinates, hey, it's okay if you break down. We're going to get through this together. You can talk to me, you can talk to somebody else, and just be that supportive person to help them continue to get the job done, rather than seeing them as weak or sending them to straight to psych care or something.
Right.
So I really appreciate that about you. So you've led a bunch of teams, right? You've led them through some of the most chaotic scenes imaginable. When everything hit the fan, what leadership lessons rose to the surface that you still carry today?
Slow down, take a step back, analyze what's going on, make sure nobody's getting hurt, make sure your guys aren't in any kind of danger, and just let your decisions be solid. Don't second guess yourself. So once you start second guessing yourself, that's when you start getting into trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you give me a time where you had to do that? You had to slow everything down. Maybe things were going too fast and you were able to slow everything down and kind of take control, and things worked out okay because of that?
I'm sure there are. Basically any SWAT call out we go to is always something that we're gonna take our time and go slow on. We had one incident where Jason County chased a guy into a house that was full of 60 party goers. And, that was a very chaotic scene. Everything's moving very rapidly. But once we got the people out of the house, we got everything settled, we started talking to them. We held what we had and started, hey, did you see him? Where's he at? What's going on? And we got that tidbit of information. So we were able to take a step back, say, okay, here's what we need to do. X, Y, and Z. We're going to do it in this order. When X stops, we're going to go to Y. Once we're done with Y, then we're going to push for Z. So that's the basic, easiest thing I can come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't know if what the legality is over in Tennessee, but in Alaska, suicide is not a crime. There's, CIT, crisis intervention, has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, I would say. I mean, it's changed before that because it wasn't really even a thing a little bit before that. So, there's been scenes that I was on, like when I first started in crisis intervention and as an officer, where, you had someone and you knew they were trying to kill themselves, you'd rush in. And oftentimes that would put you and the officers in more danger than it was worth, right?
Mhm.
And it would create chaos outside of just that scene, and a lot of liability in the department as well. And so now there's a lot of times that crisis intervention we often are just there to sit and trying to talk to them and talk someone off the ledge. We don't use all the, all the tools and the contraptions unless we really have to for maybe a hostage situation or something that's going to endanger other lives of the public, right? So when you say that, that I had flashbacks of my own that I was going through all the times that where we've rushed in and thankfully it worked out okay, but maybe sitting back and really slowing things down would have really helped a lot. So it's really interesting that you say that, and it's nice to hear.
Well, there's case law out there now about law enforcement going in with people who are just suicidal, taking out any kind of threat to anybody else or any other kind of criminal aspect. In Tennessee, it's not a crime to harm yourself either. So there's a lot of case law out there that made our teams slow down. We're not going to go in on somebody who's just suicidal. I have two great hostage negotiators. They will talk to them until they're blue in the face and just get them to come out. And that's always the end goal. Just come out. We can deal with it. And, you're looking at a permanent solution to a temporary problem 90% of the time. So with the new case laws, this definitely had us take a step back to say, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, barring any other kind of criminal activity.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. So I want to jump back a little bit. In your forensic accounting work, you're trained to see fraud and deceit and manipulation buried under numbers, right? So how does that skill translate to reading people, especially suspects?
Numbers are absolute. They're always going to give you the answer that they're going to give you. The numbers can be manipulated. People are not absolute. People are deceitful. They're not always, they're not going to, you're not going to be able to look at them like you can the numbers. So I don't think forensic accounting or that degree has anything to do with me when it comes to dealing with suspects or reading suspects. That just comes in time. You learn the human body does certain things when they do certain aspects of it. What it does help me is it helps me when I'm talking to somebody, helps me stay on track. It helps me keep that organization, able to talk to them. You may have somebody who is highly educated, where somebody with just a high school diploma may not be able to talk to that person because they're talking at a different level. But it allows me to say, okay, well, let's talk at that level if that's where you want to go. You want to try to be smarter than me? Okay, let's go ahead. I'm not saying that somebody with a high school diploma is not educated. That's not what I'm trying to get at there. But I think it's just helped me keep myself organized when I'm having to deal with something.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I was thinking about that earlier, but I totally got sidetracked in my own brain when you were talking about your education. And, a lot of officers only have like a high school diploma. And, I think a lot of college is really a place that you learn how to really just critically think and question things. Hopefully with good instructors, you learn to question things appropriately. But I know that a lot of people don't go to school or didn't go to school because they got shut down when they did question things. And the whole point of going to school is to question things in a critically thinking way and defend your argument and be able to see the opposing side of that and kind of, to think through that. Have you ever noticed any difference in the officers that you've worked with that maybe have an education versus those that don't in the way that they process, skills or anything like that?
I personally would rather have somebody who's had military under them than college.
Hmm.
I've seen a lot of the kids come out of college now have been indoctrinated in a certain way to challenge authority, to argue with authority,
Mm.
to demand the proof of everything of why you're doing this. We're not in that business to be challenged. We're not in that business to argue with authority. If we're out somewhere and your bosses tell you to do something, there's a reason they're telling you to do something. They don't have the time to sit there and explain it to you and justify it to you and argue with you about it. And that's what I'm seeing with the kids coming out of college now. The high school kids, it's almost like an instant gratification type society with these kids coming out of high school. I want X, Y, and Z. I want to work 9 to 5 Monday through Friday with every weekend and holidays off. That's not how it works. But the guys and gals coming out of the military, yeah, they might be rigid. They might be stone faced. but they're going to do what they're told to do, and they're going to do it right. They're not going to argue with you. They might question a little bit when everything's said and done, which is fine. But in the moment, we just need to get this done, and we need to get it done. That's my
Yeah.
take on it.
No, I think you bring up a good point, and that's, I appreciate that difference in opinion and just being able to see the different education levels and backgrounds that people are coming in from. And I've never thought about it that way with the military experience. So that's great that you brought that up. Thank you for saying that. Working in so many different agencies and across states, myself and you included, you get to see all the different backgrounds and ways that people are brought up, their thinking types, the way that where where they brought up really affected them, and leads out into them. And it's kind of like with being raised as a child, you're a product of your environment. You either end up just like them or the complete opposite of it, but it takes that critically thinking through it to figure out which one that is, right? So it's interesting that you say that. Uh, and it's interesting in a police culture that these new officers are still arguing about something that is paramilitary. It's not the time to argue on the scene, like you said. It's the time is either after, for clarity and justifications, or do what you're told and we'll talk about it later. There really isn't a question beforehand unless it's immoral, illegal, or
Right.
unethical. Other than that, those are your only three. If you feel that way, then you need to say something right then and there and get it, squashed, because a lot of the time leadership has answers to things that officers don't know. It's above our heads. So,
Right.
you know,
I've got 3 guys right now that I know if I tell them to do something, I'm going to get an argument.
really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not me. It's the other lieutenant. They question the chief. It's not just me. But you brought up the community. It's also very important to understand the community that you're working in.
Yeah.
You know, especially you have the incident, then you have your arrest, and then you have your court case if it's criminal. And when you go in that court case, you have a jury of that's sitting off to the side. You need to understand who those people are and how to relate to them. If you're talking at such a high level, you're going to lose that jury. If you're talking too low, you're going to lose that jury again. And I think that's a lot of things that a lot of officers now are going in with this. Well, I'm Mr. John T. Deputy, and what I said happens. That's not how you need to explain and talk to them so that they understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't disagree with you there. You got to talk to people the way that they need you to hear them or need to be heard, and the way that they understand things, on their level. Who was it? I can't remember who it was. Maybe Freud. No, I don't want to say that. But someone, maybe it was Einstein. I don't know. I think it was Einstein. It would explain that, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, then you never understood the concept well enough yourself to explain it. So I always thought that
Right.
was interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, basically, if you can't dumb it down enough to explain that to someone else on their level, then you don't understand the concept well enough to even be doing it yourself. I always thought that was interesting. I think it was Einstein. Don't quote me
I
on
need to
that.
look that up.
Yes.
Look that up.
Love that.
I put it on my wall in my
Yeah.
office.
There you go. Well, now that we've gotten all that out, I know that you've seen the worst of humanity, yet you talk about, ethical leadership and mentorship. And I want to know what's kept you from being cynical and how have you protected that mindset? Because I know that you talked about the military, and I imagine that when you first got into law enforcement, you're probably a different person, but you're pretty sociable now. I mean, you're scary, you're not aggressive, you're talkative. So I'm curious about that.
Like early on in my career, my 2 mentors, I had lost a case and I was really upset about it. And one of them pulled me aside and said, listen, he says, your job is just to present the facts. There's no reason to get all worked up over something that didn't happen. You did your job. You you presented the facts. There's no reason to be upset about it. And that's the way I just look at it is I'm just a fact collector. I see what's going on. I see the worst in humanity. but I'm just there for a job. I'm not going to let this job take my identity away from me. And that's pretty much how I've dealt with it. Is just present the facts and then move on. And just if you need to talk to somebody, and then just walk away from it. Go do your hobby, go do what you got to do, and just get it out of your system.
Mike, you said something very powerful, and I don't know that you even know that you said you heard yourself say it, but you said that you're not going to let it take your identity. And that is super powerful. When you're in the military, you're in. Your whole life is military. It's not like you're going home, to see your family every night. You go where they tell you to. Typically in law enforcement is not like that, but we often see officers being tied to the badge as their identity. And you mentioned that your accounting degree was your backup plan as well. I meant to ask you about that earlier. So I think it's really important that you had a backup plan. There's not a lot of officers who do. Most of us, this job is everything to us, and if it gets taken away from us, either by injury, choice, or the latter, we're broken. We don't even know who we are anymore. It's like you lost a purpose. And I imagine in the military, it's similar to that, but you had separated that mindset. And I find that very interesting because you came from the military. You don't often see people who know how to separate those things. Can you talk about that?
So my backup plan was actually my wife's idea. She says, look, I was choosing which direction I was going to go to college. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to get myself a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and I'll have a bachelor's degree and we'll be good to go. She's like, why? Why are you going to get a bachelor's degree in criminal justice? What happens if something happens to you? You get hurt, you get fired, being in the sheriff's department, you can get fired due to the election. What are you going to do then? And I said, you're right. So then I started looking into it, and that's where I ended up getting. I was only going to get a bachelor's degree. I said, no, why don't I just get a master's degree? It's another year and a half. Let me just finish my master's degree. So that's really where that came from. And the separation of not letting this job take my identity, again, goes back to my mentors. And I still talk to these guys today. I've actually just went home and saw one of them the other day or last month. They really put it into perspective, and they were like, you need to do something different. You need to disassociate yourself from this place and get yourself a hobby, because this job will eat you alive. And I've seen it eat guys alive. I've seen it ruin families, seen it ruin lives. And when it does, it hits them hard.
Thank you for saying that. I've seen it. Heck, I've been there. It almost ruined my life. And I was fortunate enough to have a chief in Alaska who, had rehired me after being fired and understood that, what the entire context of things that had happened. And I was grateful for that. I will never be ungrateful for that. He essentially saved my career, but in those months that I didn't know what was going on and that investigation happened, man, I was so tangled up in the law enforcement identity. And after just resigning recently, actually earlier this week, I'm no longer in law enforcement. And leading up to it, that was a hard decision. That was really hard. And I got physically ill thinking about hanging it up. But now that I have, I getting into the mental health side and still being kind of a foot in the door with law enforcement and serving, the first responder population in the mental health side. I can say that I'm grateful toward that, and I would have never gotten here without the law enforcement side. But there was so much of me before I met my husband that was tied up in the law enforcement identity, and it is always going to be a place in my heart, the number one place in my heart after God.
Mm-hmm.
But that identity of being able to hang it up and knowing that when you go home, you don't have to be the same person as when you're wearing the badge. In fact, you should be different people.
Right.
You should be your true self when you get home and you're with your family, but a lot of people don't do that. So I I think that that's incredible that you were able to do that and learn that and have those mentors with you, because not a lot of people, not a lot of officers have that mentorship and hear from good people like you to be able to recognize that and to learn that when they first get in. So that kind of brings me to this, leaving a legacy behind, right? If you could speak directly to a young officer just beginning their career who still believes that, they can fix the world, what would you tell them about it and about what it really costs to wear the badge?
First, I tell them they're not going to fix the world. That's just plain and simple. You can help individual people. I had a young lady that I dealt with 13, 14 years ago on a constant basis. To her multiple times for narcotics. Recently saw her about 2, 3 years ago, and she came up to me and she asked me, "Are you, are you Mike Dotto, used to be canine officer?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "You don't remember me, do you?" I said, "No." And she told me who she was. She says, "Listen," she says, "I'm sorry for how I was to you. I'm sorry I was mean to you, uh, and you changed my life." And she got on the straight and narrow, and she's been sober ever since. That's you'll be able to do. You're not going to be able to change the world. When you go home from this job, you need to turn that radio off. You need to put that uniform in a closet and you need to have a different identity. You don't need to bring your work home, and you don't need to bring your home to work. And the biggest thing that's always stuck with me is and it happens to so many first responders, the answer is not at the bottom of a bottle. If you need help, ask for help. I know in my agency, I've had several of my deputies come to my house asking me for advice, asking me for help. I'll stop what I'm doing. My wife's, she's understandable. She just says, okay. And we'll just sit outside on the back deck and talk, have a Dr. Pepper, and just sit there and talk for hours on end about life. So that's what my advice to them would be. Find somebody you can talk to. Find somebody who within the department you can talk to. And when you leave work, you don't have to hang out with the cop friends if you don't want to. You can have your own group of friends that aren't cops. I hang out with more people who aren't in law enforcement. Of course, they're all military. They're IT techs, they're truck drivers, they're salespersons, you know, and I leave my law enforcement off to the side unless my phone rings. Then it's time to do what I got to do. But you're not going to change the world. You can change the life. And that's more important than being able to change the world, because you're not going to be able to do that.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much for saying that. And, man, I think that when people hear that, I don't know, I literally got chills from you saying that, being able to change one person's life sometimes is changing their world. And so if you could think about it in those contexts, I think I
I never
read,
thought of that.
yeah, yeah. And I think people hearing this, new officers hearing this, and maybe some officers who have been on the job and maybe forgotten this,
Mm-hmm.
I hope that it wakes them up and, you know, lets them realize, have that little moment of awakening to go back to finding who they were. Someone asked me a few months ago, so pretty recently, were you the same person that you were 10 years ago or 15 years ago before you started the job? Of course not. So of course that's not, that wouldn't be true. You can't be the same person. The job changes you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't have to let it change you for the worse. When we stop
True.
hanging around other civilians rather than, we put ourselves in just the cop friend era, right? I don't remember any cop event that I went to that didn't involve alcohol. And I'm personally a social drinker, so every time I'd go out with people, I'd have a drink or two. And, when you're going out with the same crowd constantly, you're you become a drinker constantly, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I love that you said that and were able to bring that up. And I think that, for me, I was in a sorority in college, and, then I got into law enforcement, and of course I changed. No one's going to talk to me like this, right?
Yeah.
No one's going to respect me. Uh, and not that I want to go back to that, but I did, um, I did have to really reevaluate who I was and who I was becoming because all of my life was becoming about the badge and being able to step away from that. If I hadn't gotten married, I probably would still be in that. It was really my husband, you mentioned your wife. It was really my husband who pulled me out of that and was able to show me that I can be something beyond just the badge. And so I just find that amazing that you said that. And, I think you're giving a lot of hope to not only officers, but also to the community and the public about law enforcement and knowing that you're helping them relate to people again, not just to other cops, but to the community. And when you're seeing the worst in everybody, it's hard to relate to the community and want to befriend the community. But that doesn't mean that the community is worse. It means that you're only seeing the worst and you need to widen that scope, right? So
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. Mike, I really loved having you on today. Is there any final thoughts that I may have missed?
If you find yourself struggling, get help. It's a temporary problem. You don't need to do a permanent solution. Get yourself help. It's okay. Everybody needs help every now and then. You're only human.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike, for interviewing today. I really enjoyed having you, and I really look forward to keeping up with you. And maybe we'll have you back again in the future. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.